We're the book friends that think good.
What does this mean for our life, for our world? Yiggity yeet, my dude. I'm happy to speak. Always happy to think.
I don't know how to do that. I can look into that.
Makes you sound like a book friend that can think good.
It's Jack and it's Weston.
BFTTGs. Yeah.
Jack, I think good. Sometimes I good think, too.
Makes you sound pretty good.
We might want to make it more concise. We are going to attempt to grapple and answer 3 questions. Number 1, what did we learn? Number 2, what did we disagree with? And number 3, what are we going to do about it? I am ready to roll.
I'm in it. Weston, my book friend, tell me, what book is it that we're thinking good about today?
Fully Torqued Kilter.
Oh, not that.
Huh?
Let's rock.
Today, we are talking about Chapter 19, the Goldilocks Rule. How to stay motivated in life and work.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. These are my favorite chapters of this book. Yeah, the advanced tactics, 18, 19, and 20. These, I think, are my favorite chapters of the book. I mean, this is just good stuff. Basically, what he's talking about in this chapter is the optimal zone between boredom and failure, where tasks and habits succeed. Really what he talks about is in order to stay motivated, our brains have to be overcoming challenges that are optimally difficult. Too hard, and we become demotivated by the challenge, and too easy, and we become bored, and we fall below the motivation line into the difficult, the boredom and failure zone. So the question is, how can you make challenges just challenging enough that you're motivated to keep working on them and keep following them? The more interesting thing about this chapter to me than the Goldilocks zone, hitting optimal challenge, is his discussion on boredom. He talks about how boredom is actually the failure to success, is actually the enemy to success more than failure is. And that's really what this chapter is about. So, Weston, what were your takes on this chapter?
Well, first when he's talking about the Goldilocks zone, being in the right area of progress and feeling motivated and stuff, I instantly just thought about Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, which is just the educational application of this theory. So that's where I knew it from. So it was kind of interesting for me being like, oh, okay, I know this concept in education. And then after I read the chapter, I went back and did a little digging, and I was like, oh, okay, it's actually like this concept is older than what I knew it from,
Yeah.
Which is always good to hear.
I believe that this concept comes from a fairy tale.
Well, the name does. The name does. Then further thinking about it, from my educator's perspective, like this zone is definitely real. It's definitely real. You see it because kids that are like high cap or gifted or whatever, or even just, high achieving, they will get bored if you're not challenging them enough. And then the kids that are low and can't access the material that you're teaching in class, they will get bored because they give up on themselves. So you have to create, and that's the hard part. It's one of the most difficult things to assess and to use because the range that you have with kids, or kids will have random holes or gaps in their knowledge that you didn't anticipate, or you might be anticipating something and anticipate maybe 10 minutes on a certain concept, but then everyone's like, yeah, okay, I'm bored. I get that, right? And so it just reminded me, and it's a good reminder for all educators, of why differentiation and smaller class sizes are vital to student success, because when we get smaller class sizes, teachers are better able to assess where this Goldilocks zone is, or this zone of proximal development is for each kid, and give them the unique support and the unique level of challenge that they need. So it's definitely real in my experience, for sure, and one of the hardest things to, one of the most important things to deal with in a classroom.
Sure. I think this is an area where I struggle significantly in work and life because I am very sensitive to these extremes. I am very sensitive to the boredom extreme. So I don't know if like personality type certainly plays in here. I have, as we mentioned, I swing to the E on the extroversion scale and other things. But one of the tools that I sometimes use for spiritual development is the Enneagram, which is a personality typing system. And on that system, I'm type 7, which is like the enthusiast. And like the interesting thing about the Enneagram is that it drills into spiritual realities. And so like the temptation of a type 7 person is the deadly sin of gluttony from the ancient usage of this typing system that goes back to the 4th century. What that means is like there's a restlessness that 7s experience. And so I have in my personality a little bit of this pull that's always like resisting boredom just at any cost, even if it's maybe reckless. And so that's me at like my disintegrated or my worst self. But it's definitely there. I have a little bit of that pull. So I have the sensitivity to boredom, but I also have a little bit of a sensitivity to over challenge too, where I can easily disintegrate and become perfectionist, which is something that Weston, you and I have both talked about, how too much challenge. I think it's funny. My name is Jack, right? Like all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy is an old saying, right? And I definitely have like felt that in my life. Like I can easily fall into the overwork, overstress, over challenge area. So like hitting that Goldilocks zone is something that like it cuts deep for me because I just feel it very personally and viscerally. Like, okay, this is enough challenge, and this is not enough. I'm getting bored, or this is too much.
I think it's something that fluctuates for everyone, like even on a daily
Yeah.
basis, though. Like it's hard to stay in a Goldilocks zone in multiple areas for any amount of time.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
really difficult.
I think that that's where my learning was. Two learnings I wanted to share first pop up on page 233. First of all, he says that scientists have quantified this, and I'm sure it's like scientists like what you're talking about, not Hans Christian Andersen, but scientists have basically deduced that a task must be roughly 4% beyond your current ability. But then he makes the claim, in real life, it's typically not feasible to quantify the difficulty of an action this way. But the core idea of the Goldilocks rule remains. Working on challenges of just manageable difficulty, something on the perimeter of your ability, seems crucial for maintaining motivation. That, to me, I think is a way to phrase and analyze this in our day-to-day or in like periods of reflection, where we can like really drill into how we can hit the Goldilocks zone. Like something on the perimeter of your ability is a little bit easier to conceptualize than hit this exactly right spot, right? Like, because the fairy tale of Goldilocks is that she's dissatisfied and she has trouble making up her mind on what is just right, right? Like that's the problem. And I think that you're right. Like that's the problem for us too. We can't stay there and we have a hard time identifying it. But I think we can identify the perimeter of our ability. We can identify one bound. And if we can stay 4% inside of it, we're probably in a pretty good spot. I think also your current ability is a difficult thing to measure.
Yes.
But I think the outer bound, which is what he says, the perimeter of your ability, right? That to me is something I can at least identify maybe a little bit easier.
I visualize this instead of trying to like continually grow or continually climb. I kind of visualize it like I'm blind in a maze. Where
Okay.
I will go forward. I'm like, okay, I can take a step forward here. Okay, I took another step. I took another step. Oh, I
Yeah.
ran into a wall.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, how do I either get around this wall or get over this wall? And then you have to take a second to like figure that part out. And then you're in the next part of the maze. And then you just keep going, right? You're just going to keep doing what you're doing until you run into another wall.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I visualize it.
Yeah.
Instead of like because one of my big rules, and I think it's super true with this concept, is that progress is not linear. Like you're gonna have, there's gonna be certain things that get in your way, that get you down, or actually make you regress. Because think about it in life, sometimes you're gonna get too far into a situation, and then it's a dead end, and you have to backtrack.
Yeah.
And so like you might be into a Goldilocks zone, but then you hit a dead end, and then you have to like regress and backtrack to figure your way out. Now, I guess it's not exactly analogous. I mean, it works with this concept, but in that case, to me anyway, if you run into a wall, I'm not bored and I'm not being challenged too hard. I'm like, okay, well, that's just where I'm at. Then I need to like figure my way back out.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing is like we're so quick to frame this negatively.
Yeah.
Like I'm so bored, or I'm not being challenged enough, or I'm overworked, or I'm overstressed, or I'm overchallenged. These are complaints I hear from people all the time, right? Like, and the answer is like, maybe you can find just a little challenge, right? Like,
yeah, or a challenge in some area that you're not currently being challenged in. You can be bored in certain areas and challenged in certain areas. Like, am I really going to need to challenge myself in doing the dishes?
Right.
Or
well, and he
doing
makes that
basic
point.
tasks, right? Yeah, you have to be okay with boredom. Early on, I guess it was early on in my life at this point, I had so much instability and so much challenge all around me that I wanted boredom. I craved stability and boredom.
Yeah.
And I go I think there's just times in life when we want what we don't have, right? When we're bored and we're in a stable situation, we want excitement, we want spontaneity.
Yeah.
But when we're in like super stimulating or just like very stressful, very challenging situations, we crave the boredom and stability.
Right. I think one of the things that's really interesting is he never explicitly says it in this chapter, but I think it's a really important thing. Like he basically makes the point without saying it that like, obviously you can't be stretched beyond your limits and survive. Like, because he makes the case that like what you have to do to stay focused is to make friends with boredom, basically. He's essentially throwing out the other end of this. Like you obviously can't live in burnout.
Yeah.
Right? Like living in burnout is constant failure. And living in burnout is not sustainable. And if you're in that position of overstress or overwork, and that can be not just because your abilities are stretched in one area, it can be because your abilities are stretched just a tiny bit in too many areas.
Yeah. Like that, dude, that's been how I felt the past like month. That's exactly how I felt. It hasn't been too hard in any one area. So it's like we have all this stuff going on and it's like nothing by itself is too hard, but it's just because it's layered, you know, it's the pile on that then gets to you, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where people really hit what we know as burnout, right? Like you have a little bit too much and it's like a little bit of good things, right? Like these good things, they pile up and now all of a sudden you have too much of a good thing and you're dying. And I think that this is why this saying that I've heard many times before is like, like everybody's fighting a battle you cannot see or you do not know about, right? Like that is such a helpful thing to see in people's lives. One of the ways that I think about it as a Christian is like, I was taught by a mentor when I was a young Christian to approach everybody on the street with the mindset as I pass them, this is a person for whom Christ died, right? Like this is a person who like has struggles in their life, but like is offered redemption from those struggles and like a way out, but like nonetheless faces very serious struggles. Like this is why like loving your enemy is such an important tenet of our faith, is like, because you don't know why people are enemies or are your adversaries or what motivates their behavior. And odds are in many cases, it's because they're pushed too far.
Yeah. Or something I talk about with my students too is like the pain chain is what I call it.
Yeah.
But when someone is pushed too far and then they lash out at another person. And then the other person's like, well, where did that come from? And then they lash out at another person. So we talk about trying to end that pain chain whenever you can with kindness, right? And like we've talked so much about when someone says something mean to you, it usually means like there's something going on with them. Right. And so that's like a moment for you to ask them. Also, it's really funny because this is like an interesting psychology trick too on, they talk about getting bullied and stuff, and even kids in my class who, I'm not going to pretend that I don't have kids that don't bully, right? Mm-hmm. It changes the mindset for them a lot. If someone just asks them, are you okay? Like, hey, what's going on, man? What do you need help with? And the bully's just like, they don't know how to react. It's really funny, actually. It diffuses so many situations by just trying to stop that pain chain. Like that's what I talk about, I guess.
No, I'm not okay.
Yeah, no, it's good.
No, it's true.
Because then it opens up to vulnerability. It makes them become more of a person to the other people. The bullies then become less of an enemy, right? And it helps the kids empathize. It turns this, they're just a bully, this big, amoebus monster concept into that's a person. Yeah. That's a person.
It's the whole kicked dog argument. Like I remember talking about this. I can't remember exactly where. I think it's an example in moral philosophy, but it's like about it's about like your moral responsibility, right? Like if you're angry and you kick the dog, like that's your decision, right? So like at some point there's an opportunity to disrupt, like you said, like the pain chain. That's a perfectly like simple example. Like that can be interrupted at any point, but interrupting it is a intentional decision.
Yeah.
It must be undertaken. Like somebody has to step out and make that decision to make the opposite choice.
And it's more difficult to do that. It's a lot easier just to pass that pain chain on. It's like we talk about the two. It's a lot easier to just pass the buck.
Yeah.
Like, well, he did this to me, so I did that to them. It's like, okay, well, is that really how you want to be treated? It goes back to the golden rule a lot. To connect back to Goldilocks, but
the golden rule.
Yeah.
Yeah, if Goldilocks had practiced the golden rule, she wouldn't have been eaten by bears.
Get them.
Hey, sorry, that's my hot take this episode.
Hot take.
Okay, so here for me is this is my second learning from this, which actually goes along with what you're saying. Like your pushback about like ensuring that like boredom, we need to avoid the burnout side of this, the failure side of this. But to do so, we need to make friends with boredom. And he gives the example of this Olympic weightlifting coach. He asked what's the difference between good athletes and everyone else. And he said genetics, luck, talent. But the coach also said, at the end of the day, at some point, he says in page 233, it comes down to those who can handle the boredom of training every day, doing the same lifts over and over and over. And he says, variable rewards or not, no habit will stay interesting forever. Page 235. And he does give the example of things like flossing your teeth or brushing your teeth. Like you're just never going to improve. Like at some point you just got to get comfortable with the fact like this is the thing. I just do it every day.
Yeah.
And I think that to me is like a really big learning and takeaway from this chapter is like get comfortable with boredom. Like figure out those, like how can you, because you can't get comfortable with failure, right? Like you can, but if you do, you will wither, right? Like you can't get comfortable with burnout. And
I don't know, dude. I
just see the destruction that has wrought in so many lives, Weston.
My argument is that they're not comfortable with failure, though. Mm-hmm. Like, or at least they're not approaching failure the right way. So maybe it's just a semantic disagreement, I guess.
I think it's semantics because I think like you're talking about like I'm talking about the failure that comes from burnout, like having too much on your plate, being pushed way too far outside of your zone consistently to the point that like you can't pick up and keep going, right? Like nobody can get comfortable there. That's living a lie that we are limitless because we are limited beings. There are limits and they cannot be exhausted.
But so here's my pushback to that. You need to be okay letting things go, letting things fail. You need to grow comfortable with failure, right? We get to burnout because we're not comfortable with failing. And so that's why I'm pushing back to you, because I think people do need to get comfortable with failure because we don't learn unless we fail. So be okay with it. Get comfortable with it and learn from it. Don't be okay with failing and not learning from it. So one of my big pushbacks here on page 236, I think we're kind of here, because he talks, his quote here is, "The only way to become excellent is to be endlessly fascinated by doing the same thing over and over. You have to fall in love with boredom." And I disagree with that, because I don't think you have to fall in love with boredom. I think you have to fall in love with marginal gains and non-linear progress. That's what you need to fall in love with. You just need to, it's a whole other thing where, just like the pain chain thing, I think people just need to reframe it. It's not, when you're bored, like, I don't know. I don't know if you grew up in a household like this, but my mom always said bored is a bad word. That was like one of the worst words that we had in our house. You could never say you were bored, because there's always more to learn. There's always more to do. And I think people just don't like the aspect, myself included, especially in some areas, especially with like gardening, I'm learning. But like, you get to a certain point where you get bored because you are used to not just the variable rewards, but the big rewards when you first start learning how to do something, and you get those quote unquote newbie gains in whatever it is, where it's like, whoa, I'm seeing like genuine progress here. I'm seeing like this, I'm learning this step, this step, this step. But then what happens when you get too close to your genetic limit, or close to your time capacity of being able to do something? You have to be okay with getting 0.1% better with something over the course of like a month, right? Like you have to be okay with the marginal gains, but at least it's gains. Or you have to be okay with, well, if I'm really stuck in a wall and I'm not okay with those marginal gains, how can I pivot? I am going to accept and be comfortable that I failed in this area so that I can pivot to a different area, right? Yeah. So that's my pushback here, is like, I don't think that boredom is the right word, and I don't think the mindset that he portrays here is particularly useful or beneficial, especially in the long run. Because also on this page, he had another quote that says, "Professionals stick to the schedule. Amateurs let life get in the way." I don't know how to feel about that, because I feel very professional, and life still gets in my way. So, like, I just feel like he's unnecessarily denigrating people for things that are outside of their control. I think his point is good, but shallow. And I think that that's kind of been the theme of the book for me. So he makes a lot of good points, but they're just really shallow in their expression, I guess. I don't know. I was really passionate about that part. Did you feel any sort of way about that part?
No. No, I didn't. I mean, I felt fine about it. I was like, yeah, I mean, that's, I think like you said, a lot of it has to do with semantics. Like it has to do with your like framing for these things. And like, maybe it's just because I just see it from a different like vantage point or lens or something. Or maybe because boredom to me has been such an enemy in my life, where I feel like I have succumbed far too often to giving up too early on things that I just like read something like that and go like, man, that's harsh, but it's kind of true. Right. Like that's sort of my feeling about it, is like, that's a hard truth to swallow. Yeah. That like, You just need to get comfortable with things not always being fun
Yeah.
or satisfying
Yeah.
or, you know, making you feel good.
It's few and far between that students are willing to embrace that boredom and like the menial and
Grind.
repetitive, yeah, the repetitive grind of getting better at something. Like they want to see instantaneous results.
Mm. I
More
think this
so,
is,
more so than even 8 years ago when I started.
yeah, this is also just like, man, I really think that there needs to be some discussion in this chapter. This is probably my biggest pushback against this chapter is like, there needs to be some discussion about the burnout side.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
That's too real in our culture. I've seen the negative impact of it too much. That people push past their limits recklessly and continuously.
Yeah, we have a workaholic culture, man.
There's grind and then there's grind. And the difference is like grinding away and like working and like accepting the realities of life is more Goldilocks zone that it is constant failure, right? Like that's what I think is that's the missing concept here is like pushing your limits cannot be constantly pushing past your limits. There needs to be like rhythms of rest, of recalibration, of like there needs to be systems of like pulling back down and saying like, whoa, I'm gonna like take stock of my life. There is a reality for a lot of people though, that the answer to this is actually very simple. They need to be content with less.
Yeah, that too.
The greed of our society is abhorrent. Like we just need to be content with less so that we can like engage ourselves in meaningful work instead of slaving away.
Yeah.
And I think that so many people fall to that trap of like, I just need more,
Yeah.
right? Like so
Or
many people
not
are
even,
chasing the American dream,
yeah, not even I need more, but I need the best,
right?
right? And
Like it's comparison with neighbors.
yeah, I think that's something that I agree with you. A lot of people need to be content with less, but it's difficult because they're so, I mean, the more people that are okay with less, the more the gap widens. And the more that
It's exploited.
yeah, exactly. And that's the difficult part. The more people that are okay with less, the more people that are greedy or the people that are sociopaths
Hmm.
will just
Yeah.
continue to take and take and take and take.
Hmm.
Like I was thinking about this the other day while I was watching the NBA finals. And I was like, that dude, he's not even a billionaire. That dude made $32 million this year.
Hmm.
And I'm looking at like my salary and I'm like, that's more than I'm going to make in my entire career.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
do you, what am I supposed to do with that knowledge, right? Like I don't know.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
mind boggling, bro.
Yeah, it is.
People need to stand up for themselves, but you need to choose your battles, and it's so difficult to do that in life. Applications, I just want to continue to work on the tight feedback loop because I think that the more obvious you can make the grind and the more like we've talked about in this book, right? The more satisfying you can make those marginal gains, the more you're going to stick with them. So I just want to make sure my students can see some of that stuff.
It's the make it satisfying thing. Like that is the element that I think makes this work is like, look at your life and really look at those things. Like what is beneficial? Like all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial, right? So what is beneficial? Make that satisfying, right? There are lots of activities that are beneficial, but we want to stop doing them. And we should just look at like, how do we make those satisfying? And those things that are crushing us that we know we're pushed way too far, how do we make that unsatisfying? The unfortunate thing, as you pointed out, is I think a lot of people make money doing things that are so unsatisfying that it crushes them. And the reality is like, can you like make that unsatisfying enough that you search for a better answer to that problem? Because I think that I think for a lot of people, there are better answers. Thank you for joining us, book friends. Next week on the BFTTG pod, Jack and Weston, they're thinking good some more with you, our book friends. Check out the show notes or the description, comment section for a link to the book and any articles that we talk about in the show. Bye-bye, book friends.
Bye for this time, guys.
Do a good thing today.
I love you.
Love you too, dude.